Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Nobody, bringing you another reading for Making Nobody Happy. Today, I want to talk about borders, and I'm going to read something called Borders in Cell Biology. Now, before we get too deep into this, this is just a general discussion. I'm going to say some things at the end on what bringing up the subject of borders means to other people and what it means to me. But let me read this to you and just keep an open mind for now. Borders in cell biology. I think the most important question about borders is permeability. You need borders because you want to select what crosses them. The state is like a living organism. Living organisms have cell membranes and cell walls. That's one of their defining necessary features. And there's a selectivity that allows certain things in and certain things out intelligently based on what the needs and conditions are for life within that organism. Having a purpose, having a distinct nature, means there's a responsibility to maintain stewardship over that process. When a cell loses the integrity of its membrane, it ceases to exist. It's invaded from without and devoured, and its internal contents disperse in an uncontrolled manner into its surroundings. It ceases to be. It has no ability to maintain its biological distinctiveness. Superorganisms like the state are no different. You can argue that you need to adjust the permeability of the membrane, that there's some useful nutrient in the surrounding environment, and that it would be helpful to adjust the gating mechanisms to allow it in. And cells have special internal structures that facilitate transport across that membrane. They don't just allow things in by self-selection. They have mechanisms to restrict transport, both active and passive, and they have mechanisms to facilitate transport. This is the pattern of life, and it applies across all levels of life. So we should look to the design of life for sense and learn to find balance. Borders are reasonable. In fact, they're necessary for life to exist. An absolutely impermeable border will keep everything out and everything in, but it will bind and starve the cell. And a completely permeable or non-existent border is useless and means the end of the organism. Somewhere in between lies selectivity, facility, purpose, growth, adaptation, and intelligence. If a single-celled organism can figure it out, so can people. Well, that's all for the meat of that. But I just wanted to say, if you go online, it's very easy to find this video, which I've always found a fascinating video. And it's of a single-celled organism swimming around that is in the process of having its membrane break down. And you see it swim, 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 swim. And then all of a sudden you start to see little bits just leaking out of it, and it keeps swimming, it keeps trying to do things, it keeps going for a while, but bit by bit, little bits are just sort of dribbling out, and then all of a sudden it just stops, and its entire cell membrane collapses, and it disperses into the surrounding environment, and it's such a tiny little microcosm of life, of this little one-celled organism struggling to survive while its integrity is slowly breaking down. Now, as I said, my goal in that is not to say this particular solution or that particular solution. It's just to say borders are part of life. Can we stop being stupid and saying no borders? Borders that are absolutely impenetrable. No, both of those are lazy, unintelligent answers. Borders are something that life needs to exist. Learning how to manage them, what to let in, what to let out, that takes work. It takes intelligence. It takes thought and effort and negotiation. It takes understanding of what is inside and what the needs are, and understanding of what is outside and what the needs and dangers are, and those both need to be covered. So I am not someone who is all rah, 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 political borders, whatever, but that's partly because I don't like to jump too much on board simplified bandwagons or turning something into too much of a symbolic effort. And even back in the Trump days, to me, that I understand the thinking behind it, but and in some ways would even be supportive, but I also felt like this is being reduced to too much of a symbolic value. It's being used too much as just a point of rhetoric and not of actual thoughtful policy necessarily. This is more of a symbolic act. And then I also felt that way about the attempts to thwart it. I felt like the attempts to thwart it were equally as silly and made silly arguments and were also completely symbolic and not about any kind of reasonable policy position. But it's not so much about politics that I even care as much, although that's very relevant. I think it's a question you have to answer as a person. And there are different personality types that kind of go different directions on the question of borders. Conscientious people tend to have very high expectations of borders, and they patrol them very powerfully. And then open people are not as focused on borders. They want to find out what's out there. They want to bring it in. They want to try it. They're prejudiced to think it's going to be fine, and you don't need a systematic approach to it. Whereas a more conscientious person believes in a more systematic approach to things. And they both have their value. 8 out of 10 times, or maybe more than that, the conscientious person is technically probably the most right, because they're leaning on, past wisdom, established functional norms, and generally people who are highly conscientious have the best outcomes in life. But a lot of innovation comes from open people, highly creative people. And so clearly we need to keep those doors open because we need those innovations. At the same time, you can't take for granted they're going to be good or safe. You don't know that it's going to be okay. At the same time, there is a chance that it could be very valuable. So a lot of high openness people tend to self-destruct, but we also get a lot of benefits from them too in the process of their self-destruction. I myself am an incredibly open person. Like on the personality test, I am like off the charts high on openness. And so I am someone who's like, ooh, I want to look at that. I want to understand that. I want to see that. I kind of want to taste that. But my respect for the dangers of openness and my respect also for conscientious people comes from my experience as an open person. The reason I am cautious and recognize the dangers of complete impermeability is because I have experienced those dangers, because I recognize the instability. It's because that's the kind of person I am. I hate having borders, but at the same time, holy cow, have I learned to appreciate them. And my wife is an extremely conscientious person, and I have really learned to appreciate her and see the value in that, and see how protective it is and useful, and just be like, wow, it is really one of the most important things I did was learn to appreciate the value of this other kind of person and the risks and the problems of someone like me. So I don't criticize open borders in life or in a political sense from the perspective of someone who is all about that. That is not at all what I'm about. And even in a political sense, I grew up in a town with tons of illegal immigrants who are our friends and our neighbors and playmates, business owners, and of course I also have friends who are legal immigrants. And so, it's not a simple thing. It's not so simple, of just saying, well, here's my position. I'm pro-immigration, or I'm anti-immigration, or I'm for borders, or I'm against borders. Those are all stupid questions. Everyone is essentially obligated by life to respect borders, but is obligated by life to be open to immigration, to the crossing of those borders. Both of these are necessary states. Both of these important things. We have to have not a static dead system where it is a single thing. It is a single unitary value. So we can just have one system and that's it. And then we don't have to think about it anymore. There's no adaptation. There's no thought involved. There's no weighing involved. No effort. No, instead, it's these two things. And you know what that means? That means exchange. Negotiation. For how long? Forever. That's what it means to be alive. To be alive is to be in continual process, continual movement, continual awareness, continual adjustment. It is like riding a bicycle. You don't ride a bicycle by pushing down on one pedal forever. If you've actually studied the mechanics of bicycling, a bicycle never holds center, pretty much. When you are pedaling a bicycle, it is just a controlled wobble. It is a constant balancing of the needs of the terrain and the machine you're on and how to get it where you want to get it, and constant adaptation. You're literally never just like this. It is a constant controlled wobble. It's a constant leaning back and forth. It's constantly adjusting pressure and balance between two values that creates this dynamic system that can actually go places. That is what allows you to steer and to move. And that's what life is like. These things, how they work at the most basic levels of human life, at the most, not even human life, just biological life, these most basic mechanics actually scale all the way up. I mean, the big things high up are built on the little things. The principles that are down at the bottom often translate right up through. This is what life is like. This is what life is. If you want a super organism to thrive, to get places, it's subject to the same laws, problems, restrictions, and needs as even tiny little ones. Anyway, that's all the discussion about this subject for today. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk to you next time.